The autumn mist clung to the moors like a shroud, and Blackwood Manor rose from it, a jagged silhouette of granite and grief against the bruised twilight sky. Inside, in a library where the only warmth came from a reluctant fire, Miss Elara Vance stood before the master of the house, her hands clenched so tightly the knuckles were white moons against her pale skin. The man was a study in obsidian and ice. Alistair Beaumont, the 9th Duke of Blackwood, was as much a part of the local folklore as the manor itself. They called him the Iron Duke, a man who had inherited a crumbling estate at 20 and rebuilt its fortunes with a ruthless, mathematical precision. His face, handsome in a severe classical way, was a mask of cold neutrality. Only his eyes, the color of a winter storm, held any life, and it was a sharp, analytical light that made Elara feel less like a woman and more like a problem to be solved. "I believe I have made my position clear, Miss Vance," he said, his voice a low, resonant timbre that held no inflection. "The promissory note is quite definitive. Your late father pledged your family's cottage and the surrounding 5 acres as collateral against a loan which, upon his passing, fell into default." "It cannot be," Elara whispered, the words tasting of ash. Her father, a gentle, brilliant botanist, had been a man of modest means but never a reckless one. "There must be some mistake. He would never have risked our home. The ledgers do not make mistakes." The Duke gestured to a formidable leather-bound book on his desk. "He borrowed £500 from Lord Ashworth 2 years ago. I have since acquired the debt." Elara's mind reeled. £500, an impossible sum. It would take her a decade of painting miniatures to earn such an amount. Why? Why would you acquire it? "Lord Ashworth's methods of collection can be aggressive. I considered it a matter of regional stability to consolidate certain outstanding accounts." He spoke of financial ruin as one might discuss the rotation of crops. He straightened a stack of papers, his movements economical and precise. "The fact remains the debt is mine. The property by rights is forfeit." Elara felt the floor tilt beneath her. She thought of her small cottage, of the morning light slanting through the conservatory where her father's orchids still bloomed, the only living legacy he had left her. It was everything. "Your Grace, I am a miniaturist of some small repute. I can work. I can pay you back. In installments. Please just give me time." "Time is a luxury the Blackwood estate cannot afford," he stated flatly. "The autumn rents are due, the west wall of the old priory requires immediate repair, and my new pumping engine for the lower mines is over budget. I require capital, Miss Vance, not promises." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, from her neatly coiled auburn hair to the ink stain on her finger, a detail she was sure he had catalogued and filed away. "However, I am prepared to offer an alternative solution." Elara held her breath. "You will marry me." The clock on the mantelpiece, a monstrous contraption of brass and whirling gears of the Duke's own design, seemed to stop ticking. The world went silent. I beg your pardon?" "It is a logical arrangement," he continued, as if he had just proposed a game of chess. "I require a duchess. The title demands it, and an heir is a practical necessity. You require financial salvation and a roof over your head. You are of good family, educated, and I am told your reputation is adequate." He consulted a small notebook. "Miss Elara Vance, 24, accomplished in watercolors and miniature portraiture, known for a quiet and studious demeanor. You are suitable." Indignation, hot and sharp, pierced through her shock. "Suitable? You speak of marriage as if you are acquiring a new piece of machinery for your minds." For the first time, a flicker of something, not emotion, but perhaps intellectual curiosity, appeared in his eyes. "Is it not a mechanism of sorts? A social contract designed for the propagation of lineage and the consolidation of assets? Emotion merely introduces an unpredictable and often destructive variable." He stepped away from the desk, his tall frame blocking the firelight, casting her in his long shadow. "The offer is simple. Marry me and the debt is cancelled. Your cottage will remain yours to do with as you please. Refuse and Mr. Davies, my solicitor, will begin foreclosure proceedings at dawn." She stared at him, this cold, calculating man who saw the world as a series of equations. He was offering her a gilded cage in exchange for her freedom, her future, her very self. Yet the alternative was destitution. To lose her home, her father's last sanctuary, was a thought too painful to bear. What would you do, listener, if faced with such a choice? Lose your home and history, or bind yourself to a man of ice? Why me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. With your title and wealth, you could have any debutante in London. Debutantes are bred for frivolity and gossip, he said with a hint of distaste. I have no time for either. You, on the other hand, are the daughter of a man of science. I assume you possess a capacity for rational thought. You understand contracts. This is a contract, nothing more. She looked around the library, at the towering shelves of books, the intricate astronomical charts on the walls, the half-finished mechanical bird on a workbench. It was not a home, it was a laboratory, and he was its cold, detached curator. She would be just another specimen in his collection, but her father's orchids, they would wither without her. The cottage would fall into the hands of strangers. Drawing a deep, shuddering breath, Elara met his stormy gaze. She lifted her chin, her artist's eye noting the faint, weary lines around his that his rigid control could not quite erase. I have terms. One of his dark eyebrows arched, a minute shift in the frozen landscape of his face. Indeed. I will not be a prisoner in this house. I will require a studio with a north-facing window. I will continue my work. The income from my commissions will be my own. He considered this for a moment, then gave a curt nod. Acceptable. The East Tower has a room that would suit your needs. And, she added, her courage growing, I will not be managed. I will be your duchess, but I will remain myself. Yourself, Miss Vance, is now contractually obligated to become the Duchess of Blackwood. As long as your identity does not interfere with the duties of that role, I have no objection. He extended a hand, not in warmth, but as if to seal a bargain. Do we have an agreement? Elara looked at his long, capable fingers, the hand of a man who built machines and signed fortunes into existence. Placing her own, trembling hand into his felt like leaping from a cliff into a cold, dark sea. His skin was cool, his grip firm and impersonal. Yes, Your Grace, she said, her voice hollow. We have an agreement. The wedding was as swift and devoid of sentiment as the proposal. It took place in the manor's dusty chapel, with a grim-faced Mr. Davies and a startled-looking housekeeper as witnesses. Alistair spoke his vows with the same dispassionate clarity he used to dictate letters. Elara's own voice was a thread of sound in the cavernous silence. She wore a simple gray traveling dress. There were no flowers, no music, no celebration. She was now the Duchess of Blackwood, a title that felt as ill-fitting as a borrowed coat. Her new life began in a suite of rooms in the East Wing. They were opulent, furnished with heavy dark woods and rich faded tapestries, but they felt as cold and unwelcoming as the rest of the manor. Her husband, as he now was, informed her that they would maintain separate chambers. It is a more efficient arrangement, he had stated, and she had been too relieved to argue. Their marriage was a sham, a business deal, and this physical distance was its most honest expression. The days at Blackwood Manor were governed by the chiming of 100 clocks. Alistair was a man ruled by routine. He rose before dawn to work in his study or his vast forbidden workshop. He spent his afternoons riding out to inspect his mines or the tenant farms, returning for a silent, formal dinner at precisely 8 o'clock. During these meals, he would occasionally offer a clipped observation about the estate's finances or a new piece of legislation in Parliament. He never asked about her day. He never spoke of anything personal. Elara found her solace in the room Alistair had provided for her studio. It was at the top of a disused tower, a circular chamber with a magnificent arched window that flooded the space with the cool, consistent light of the north. She sent for her supplies, her pigments and brushes, her vellum and ivory discs, and threw herself into her work. Painting was her anchor. While her hands were busy grinding cobalt or mixing ochre, her mind could find a semblance of peace. She painted the mist-shrouded moors, the gnarled oaks in the deer park, the stoic, granite face of the manor itself. But she did not paint its master. She found she could not capture him. His face was a fortress, his eyes holding depths she could not penetrate. Her art was about revealing character, the truth beneath the surface. But with Alistair, There seemed to be no surface to breach, only wall after impenetrable wall. Her sole companion in the vast echoing house was Mr. Davies, the solicitor. He was a small, neat man in his late 50s, with a perpetually worried expression and spectacles that were always sliding down his nose. He visited twice a week to consult with the Duke, and would always make a point of seeking Elara out. "Your Grace," he would say, bowing stiffly, "I trust the manor is to your liking?" "It is very grand, Mr. Davies," Elara would reply. One afternoon he found her in the gallery, studying the portraits of the previous Dukes of Blackwood. They were a grim-faced lineage, men of iron and stone like Alistair. "He was not always so," Mr. Davies said quietly, startling her. He stood beside her, looking up at the portrait of a young boy with Alistair's eyes, but with a smile playing on his lips. "That is his Grace, at age 10, with his father." The eighth Duke in the portrait was a handsome man who radiated a charm utterly absent in his son. "What happened?" Elara asked softly. Davies sighed, polishing his spectacles with a handkerchief. His father was a man of grand ideas, an inventor like his Grace, but without the discipline. He pursued projects with a passion that bordered on obsession and a disregard for costs that bordered on lunacy. He poured the Blackwood fortune into schemes that always seemed to be on the verge of a breakthrough that never came. He gestured to the portrait. Then came the tragedy, a fire in the workshop. The eighth Duke was lost. Alistair was only 16. He inherited a title, a mountain of debt, and a collection of broken dreams. He spent the next decade paying off his father's creditors, clawing back every acre, every shilling. It changed him. "It encased him in iron," Elara murmured, looking from the smiling boy to the memory of the cold man she had married. "Indeed, Your Grace," Davies said sadly. "He trusts numbers because they are predictable. He trusts machines because they do what they are told. People were what ruined his father." He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "He is not a cruel man, Duchess. He is a man who fears chaos above all else. Your marriage, I confess I did not understand it at first, but I believe he saw in you order, stability." The solicitor's words offered a sliver of context but no comfort. She was not a wife. She was a bulwark against chaos, a cog in the Blackwood machine. Driven by a restless curiosity, Elara began to explore the manor. It was a labyrinth of forgotten corridors and dust-sheeted rooms. Have you ever felt that a place held secrets in its very walls, whispering stories you were meant to uncover? That was how Blackwood Manor felt to Elara. She discovered a derelict observatory with a great brass telescope aimed at a clouded sky. She found a music room where a harp stood shrouded in white, its strings broken. The house was a museum of abandoned passions. One rainy afternoon, her explorations led her to the West Wing, the area that housed Alistair's workshop, which he always kept locked. Today, however, a small side door, almost hidden behind a tapestry depicting a grim hunting scene, was slightly ajar. A faint, rhythmic ticking emanated from within. Hesitantly, she pushed it open and slipped inside. She found herself not in the main workshop, but in a smaller, connected study. It was utterly fascinating. The room was a controlled explosion of creation. Blueprints and schematics were pinned to every wall. Gears, springs, and polished pieces of brass lay in meticulously organized trays, and on a central table sat the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, a clockwork nightingale, its silver feathers so finely wrought they seemed real. As she drew closer, she saw that this room was different from the library. It was personal. Tucked away on a bookshelf, between a treatise on metallurgy and a manual on hydraulics, was a row of worn, leather-bound journals. They were not Alistair's. The handwriting on the first page was a wild, looping script. The journals of Arthur Beaumont, 8th Duke of Blackwood. Her heart pounded. This was the place Mr. Davies had spoken of, the place where Alistair's father had dreamed and failed. She opened a journal at random. The pages were filled with frantic sketches of impossible machines, but also with notes, calculations, and letters. A folded, yellowed piece of paper fell out from between the pages. It was a letter addressed to her own father. "Dearest Thomas," it read, "the breakthrough is upon us. The differential gear system for the loom is the key. Ashworth provides the final piece of the financial puzzle, and your botanical knowledge of fiber tensile strengths has been invaluable. We shall revolutionize the textile industry, my friend. All three of us, partners in triumph. Yours in industry, Arthur. Elara sank into a nearby chair, the letter trembling in her hand. Her father, a partner of the 8th Duke, and Lord Ashworth, the man from whom her father had supposedly borrowed money, he was the third partner. It made no sense. Why would her father borrow from a man with whom he was in business? She dug deeper into the journals, her search becoming more frantic. She found more letters, a draft of a partnership agreement between the three men, and then, tucked into the final journal, a series of devastating entries. Ashworth is a viper, the 8th Duke had written. He has manipulated the patents, registered them in his name alone. He claims our designs were unworkable without his improvements. Thomas and I are ruined. He has leveraged everything against me. The final entry was dated the day before the fire. Ashworth came today. He offered to buy my share for a pittance. When I refused, he smiled. A man's workshop is a dangerous place, Your Grace. So many flammable materials. The man is a devil. I must protect the prototypes. I have hidden the main schematic. Thomas has the only other copy. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The loan to her father wasn't a loan. It was likely a pittance Ashworth paid him for his silence, framed as a debt to hold over him. And Alistair, he hadn't bought the debt to persecute her. He had bought it to protect her. He had known Ashworth would use it to crush her, to gain access to her cottage, perhaps searching for the very schematic his father mentioned. Her marriage wasn't a punishment. It was a shield, a clumsy, cold, desperate attempt to pull her out of harm's way. The only way a man who dealt in contracts and control knew how. He had forced her into a cage not to imprison her, but to save her from the wolf circling outside. The sound of the main workshop door opening made her jump. Alistair stood there, his face like thunder. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. Elara stood up, holding the letter. "I am discovering the truth." She watched as his eyes fell to the journals, then to the letter in her hand. The mask of indifference shattered, replaced by a raw, profound weariness. He closed his eyes for a moment, and in that instant, she saw not the Iron Duke, but the 16-year-old boy who had lost everything. "You should not have seen these," he said, his voice rough. "Why didn't you tell me?" she cried, her anger and confusion melting into a wave of empathy. "Why let me believe you were a monster?" "Because the truth is a more dangerous commodity than lies," he said, finally looking at her. The storm in his eyes was no longer analytical, it was pained. "Ashworth is not a man to be trifled with. He has spent the last 8 years building an empire on my father's stolen work. He is powerful, respected. A direct accusation would be my word against his. With no proof, I would be ruined by libel. The journals are the ramblings of a man my world considered mad and bankrupt," he finished grimly. "They prove nothing. The only thing that would prove it is the final schematic for the automated loom or a working prototype. Both were lost in the fire." "My father had a copy," she whispered, remembering the journal entry. Alistair nodded. "I suspected as much. That is why I had to get you away from the cottage. Ashworth has been buying up land around it for a year. He was closing in. The foreclosure was a fiction, a pretext to make you leave. Marrying you was the only way I could think of to bring you under the protection of the Blackwood name, a name Ashworth, for political reasons, is not yet prepared to challenge openly." He ran a hand through his dark hair, the first gesture of uncertainty she had ever seen from him. "It was a flawed plan. I am not adept at matters of a personal nature." Suddenly, the cold silences, the rigid formality, the separate rooms, it was all cast in a new light. It wasn't rejection, it was respect. He was honoring the transactional nature of their agreement because he believed he had nothing else to offer her. Just then, the butler appeared at the door, his face pale. "Your Grace, a visitor has arrived." "Lord Ashworth." Alistair's entire body went rigid. He looked at Elara, his eyes filled with a stark warning. "He must not know you are here. He must not know you suspect anything." "I will not hide," Elara said, a new resolve hardening her voice. She was no longer just a pawn in this game. She was the daughter of Thomas Vance, a partner in triumph. She walked with Alistair to the grand drawing room. Lord Ashworth was a handsome, silver-haired man in his late 40s, with a practiced, easy smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. Elara, the miniaturist, saw the truth of him instantly. The cruel set of his mouth when he thought no one was watching, the possessive way his gaze swept over the room's treasures. "Blackwood, my dear fellow," Ashworth boomed, clapping Alistair on the shoulder. Alistair flinched almost imperceptibly. "I was in the neighborhood and felt I must pay my respects. And to meet the new Duchess." He turned his oily charm on Elara, taking her hand and bowing low over it. "Enchanted, Your Grace. Your husband is a man of many surprises. He snatched you up from right under society's nose." "My husband is a man of decisive action," Elara replied, her voice steady as she withdrew her hand. Later, Alistair was called away to deal with an urgent estate matter, leaving Elara alone with their guest. The moment the door closed, Ashworth's demeanor shifted. The bonhomie vanished, replaced by a predatory stillness. "A curious match," he mused, circling her as she sat on the sofa. "The Iron Duke and the artist. He is a man who appreciates assets. I wonder what asset you represent." He stopped in front of her, his voice dropping. "Your father was a clever man, a bit of a dreamer, like the old Duke. Such men often keep meticulous records, sentimental things, old letters, forgotten drawings. It would be a shame if such trifles were to be misplaced, or worse, fall into the wrong hands." He was fishing, probing. It was a veiled threat and a question in one. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she met his gaze without flinching. "My father's only legacy was his love of orchids, my lord," she said, her voice betraying none of her inner turmoil. "His papers were mostly notes on cross-pollination. I doubt they would be of interest to a man of industry such as yourself." Ashworth smiled, a slow, unpleasant spreading of his lips. "Perhaps, but one must be thorough. Tell me, Duchess, does your cold husband ever speak of his father's fire? Such a tragedy. One might almost think it was convenient, swept away all that debt and failure, leaving him with a clean slate to build upon." The insinuation was monstrous, a poisoned dart aimed at the very heart of Alistair's past. He was suggesting Alistair was responsible for his own father's demise. This was her high-stakes conflict, a battle of wills fought with nothing but words and whispers in a silent room. He was trying to break her, to isolate her from the man who had, in his own strange way, tried to protect her. "The only convenience I see, Lord Ashworth," Elara said, rising to her feet to face him, "is the one that allowed you to build a textile empire on patents that were, I believe, originally developed on this very estate." The smile vanished from his face. His eyes turned to chips of ice. For a moment, the raw, vicious anger beneath his polished exterior was laid bare. "You are cleverer than you look, Your Grace. But cleverness is a dangerous quality in a woman. See that it doesn't lead you to the same end as your father and his foolish duke." He bowed curtly. "A pleasure to make your acquaintance." When Alistair returned, he found Elara standing by the window, her hands gripping the sill. He saw her pale face and knew instantly that something was wrong. "What did he say?" "He knows," she said, turning to him. "Or he suspects. He threatened me, Alistair. He threatened us both." He came to her side, his usual composure gone, replaced by a cold fury. "I should never have left you alone with him." "No," she said, looking up at him, her fear giving way to a fierce, burning determination. "It's good that you did, because now I know. He's afraid of us. He's afraid of what we might find." Her artist's mind was racing, connecting details. "My father's notes. He didn't just write about orchids. He drew everything. He had the most incredible visual memory. If he saw that schematic—" "You think he drew it?" Alistair asked, hope warring with skepticism in his voice. "I think," Elara said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "that it's time we paid a visit to my cottage." They rode to the cottage at dusk, a sense of urgency propelling them. Alistair had never seen Elara's home. He stood awkwardly in the small, cluttered sitting room, dwarfed by the low ceilings. It was a room filled with books, dried flowers, and sketches pinned to the walls. It was a room filled with. The air in the conservatory was thick with the scent of damp earth and the sweet, vanilla-like fragrance of orchids. For hours they had sifted through a lifetime of botanical obsession, their search yielding nothing but elegant drawings of pistils and stamens. Alistair's brief, uncharacteristic flare of hope had guttered and died, leaving the familiar ash of resignation. He slumped onto a potting stool, the rigid posture of the Duke momentarily forgotten, replaced by the weary slump of a man defeated by ghosts. It was an illogical hope, he stated, his voice flat, the sound absorbed by the humid air. Ashworth is not a fool. If such a document existed here, he would have acquired it by any means necessary years ago. No, Elara insisted, her voice quiet but unyielding. She stood motionless in the center of the glass house, her artist's eye not seeing individual plants, but the composition of the whole room. It was a cathedral of memory, and her father had been its architect. You are thinking like an industrialist, Alistair. You must think like a naturalist. He did not hide things by locking them away. He hid them through camouflage. Her gaze drifted across the walls, which were papered not with floral prints, but with hundreds of her father's own botanical illustrations, a testament to his meticulous hand. Her eyes stopped, held captive by a single, magnificent rendering that dominated the far wall. It was larger than the others, a portrait of a rare, ghostly white orchid, the Phalaenopsis amabilis. His masterpiece, she whispered, the words a breath of memory. He worked on it for a year. He said it contained everything he had ever learned about form and structure. She moved toward it, a pilgrim approaching a shrine. Alistair remained seated watching her, a strange pang of something akin to pain in his chest. He was watching a woman commune with a past he could not access, a love he could not comprehend. As she drew closer to the drawing, she tilted her head, her expression shifting from fond remembrance to sharp, analytical focus. The veins on the broad, flat petals, the delicate stippling on the leaves, they were not the soft, organic lines of nature. They were too perfect, too geometric, and hidden within the intricate shading were minuscule, almost subliminal notations, numbers and symbols. Her eyes traced the complex network of roots depicted at the base of the plant, a tangled, pale mass. But it was not a root system. It was a machine, a symphony of cogs, levers, and regulators, disguised as the life-giving heart of a flower. Alistair, she breathed, the sound trembling with the force of her discovery. It is not a drawing of an orchid. It is a drawing disguised as an orchid. He was beside her in an instant, his skepticism dissolving into pure, unadulterated awe. He saw it now, his engineer's mind instantly recognizing the forms. The differential gear train, the tension regulators for the shuttle, the power loom's escapement mechanism. It was all there, a work of mechanical genius hidden within a work of botanical art. He traced the lines with a finger, his touch reverent. He looked from the schematic to Elara's face, illuminated by the pale moonlight filtering through the glass roof, and he felt a fundamental shift in the tectonic plates of his soul. He had sought a logical solution. She had found a beautiful one. They did not return to the manor. They worked through the night in the small cluttered cottage, the world shrinking to the circle of candlelight on the table between them. They were no longer Duke and Duchess, debtor and proprietor. They were partners, their minds working in a seamless harmony that transcended words. His knowledge of mechanics unlocked the function of the drawing's forms. Her artist's intuition deciphered the code hidden in the shading and colors. The chamomile tea she brewed grew cold, forgotten. The clock on the cottage mantel ticked away the hours, a gentle counterpoint to the frantic, excited rhythm of their work. As dawn painted the moors in hues of rose and gray, they had it, a complete, annotated blueprint, copied onto fresh vellum in Elara's steady hand. It was an invention decades ahead of its time, a design that would not only revolutionize the textile industry, but do so with an elegance and efficiency that made Ashworth's stolen, clumsy machines seem primitive. "We have him," Alistair said, his voice raw with an emotion he could not name. It was more than triumph. It was vindication for his father. It was justice for hers. He looked at Elara, her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes blazing with fierce intelligence. A stray lock of auburn hair had fallen across her cheek, and without thinking, he reached out and gently tucked it behind her ear. His fingers grazed her skin, and a current, warm and startling, passed between them. For the first time, his touch was not a contractual seal or a formal gesture. It was a question. She did not pull away. She leaned into his touch, just for a moment, her eyes closing. In that silent, shared instant, the cold foundation of their marriage fractured, and something new, fragile and green, began to push its way toward the light. Their victory was not a dramatic confrontation in a crowded ballroom. It was a quiet, precise, and utterly devastating checkmate, executed in the cold neutrality of a solicitor's office in York. It was a plan born of their two minds, Alistair's logic, Elara's artistry. Mr. Davies, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose and his hands trembling with nervous excitement, arranged a meeting with Lord Ashworth. The pretext was an offer from the Duke of Blackwood to sell a parcel of land adjacent to Ashworth's largest mill, a tempting prize. Ashworth arrived, radiating the smug confidence of a predator who believes his prey is finally capitulating. He found Alistair and Elara waiting for him, seated across a vast mahogany table. Between them lay a single sheet of vellum, the orchid schematic. "A lovely drawing, Your Grace," Ashworth began, his tone dripping with condescension. "A new hobby?" "A family heirloom," Alistair replied, his voice as cold and hard as granite. "The final design for the Beaumont Vance automated loom. I believe you are familiar with an earlier, cruder version of the concept." Ashworth's smile tightened. "Fascinating fantasies, but you have no prototype, no proof, just the scribblings of a madman and a botanist." "That is where you are mistaken," Elara said, her voice clear and steady. She placed a small, intricate object on the table. It was not the clockwork nightingale. It was a working model of the loom's core component, the differential gear train, which they had spent the last 2 weeks painstakingly building in the workshop. It was small enough to fit in the palm of a hand, a beautiful, humming jewel of brass and steel. "My father was a man of science. He kept duplicates of everything vital. We found his prototype notes. With my husband's engineering skill, it was a simple matter to reconstruct." Ashworth stared at the model, his face draining of color. He understood. He knew that the component was the key to the entire loom's efficiency, the very piece his own engineers had failed to replicate, forcing them to use a less effective, power-hungry alternative. "This changes nothing," he hissed, his composure cracking. "It is still my word against yours. My patents are registered, my investors secure." "Your investors," Alistair said smoothly, "are the primary reason for this meeting." He gestured to a door behind Ashworth. It opened, and 2 men stepped into the room. One was the chief magistrate of the North Riding. The other was Sir Reginald Croft, Ashworth's primary financial backer. They had been listening in the adjoining room. Sir Reginald, Alistair continued, was most interested to learn that the technology his consortium has invested millions in is not only stolen, but is in fact an inferior copy of a superior original. A fact you have just confirmed by identifying this mechanism. An act, the magistrate informs me, that constitutes a profound abuse of power and a series of wrongful acts against your partners. The checkmate was absolute. Ashworth was trapped not by sentiment or accusation, but by the cold, hard logic of commerce and law. He was ruined. His empire, built on a foundation of lies, crumbled in the silence of that room. The weeks that followed were a maelstrom of legal and financial activity. The manor, once a silent tomb, was now the strategic heart of a complex campaign. Alistair and Mr. Davies worked relentlessly, untangling the web of deceit Ashworth had woven, securing the patents, and negotiating with the now leaderless consortium. But the house was no longer cold. The workshop was filled with the sounds of creation as Alistair began constructing a full-scale prototype. The library fire was always lit, and Elara would read to him late into the night from treatises on mechanical engineering, her calm voice a soothing balm on his frayed nerves. They rarely spoke of the change between them, but it was a constant, living presence. It was in the way he brought her a shawl in the drafty workshop, the way she placed a hand on his arm to draw his attention to a detail in a blueprint. They were a team, a partnership so natural and complete, It felt as if it had existed for 100 years. The rigid lines of their contractual arrangement had blurred and dissolved, leaving behind a bond forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. One crisp November evening, when the last of the legal battles had been won, Alistair found her in the gallery, standing before the portrait of the smiling 10-year-old boy who had been him. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice quiet in the vast high-ceiling room. He did not say it to her back, but came to stand beside her, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Not for protecting you, that I would do again, but for the method, for the coldness of the bargain, for making you believe you were nothing more to me than a component in a machine." Elara looked from the boy in the portrait to the man beside her. The weary lines around his eyes were still there, but they were softer now. The storm in his eyes had broken, leaving behind the clear, calm depths of a winter sea. "You were a man encased in iron, Alistair. It was the only way you knew how to protect not just your home, but yourself." "It was the act of a coward," he countered, his voice rough with self-reproach. "A man so terrified of the chaos of emotion that he tried to build a world without it. I offered you a contract because I did not believe I was capable of offering anything more. I saw you as order, as stability, a rational variable." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "I was a fool. You are the most gloriously, beautifully unpredictable variable I have ever encountered. You have brought chaos into my life, Elara. You have brought light and color and sound. You have dismantled my world, and in doing so, you have saved me from it." He took her hands, his grip no longer firm and impersonal, but gentle, almost trembling. "I presented our marriage as a solution to a problem, but the truth is, the problem was me. I was hollow, and you have become my heart." He faltered, the words he had never spoken in his life catching in his throat. "I love you," with a desperation that defies all logic. "I love you. And I must ask, not as a duke to his duchess, but as the man I hope I am becoming, is it possible that you could in time feel something for me?" Tears she did not try to hide welled in Elara's eyes, catching the faint candlelight. "Oh, you brilliant, impossible man," she whispered, her hands rising to cup his face, her thumbs tracing the proud line of his jaw. "You speak of time as if it is a future prospect. I have been falling in love with you since the day I realized your cruelty was a shield for a grief you could not bear." She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was a kiss that held no desperation or uncertainty. It was a kiss of homecoming, a quiet confirmation of a truth that had been growing between them in silent, stolen moments. It was the sealing of a covenant, a promise to build a future together, not on the ruins of the past, but with the strength drawn from it. Their shared work evolved. The restoration of the Blackwood fortune was no longer the end goal, but the means to a new, grander vision. They established the Beaumont-Vance mill in the village, a venture that became a model for the entire region. The project was founded on a new philosophy, a stark departure from the cold calculus Alistair once championed. In a speech to the new village council, he spoke of their commitment to responsible governance and complete financial transparency, slowly building a foundation of community trust that had been eroded over decades. Their focus was on a holistic prosperity, a concept Elara called family wellness. They invested profits back into their people, promoting sustainable stewardship of the land through new agricultural techniques. Elara personally oversaw the creation of a new school, built using traditional methods and celebrating local craftsmanship, an act of heritage stewardship that honored the valley's history. Within the school, she established a scholarship fund to guarantee education access for all, with a special emphasis on youth literacy, creating a path to a brighter future. They knew their true philanthropic legacy would be measured not in the estate's ledgers, but in the health and hope of their people, creating a truly safe community. One evening, a year later, Alistair entered Elara's studio. A warm fire blazed in the hearth, and the room was filled with the scent of oil paint and turpentine. She was not at her easel, but sat at a small desk, studying an old leather-bound portfolio. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder, breathing in the scent of her hair. He looked down at the page she was studying. It showed a quick, cryptic sketch of a wren and below it, a line in her father's elegant script. The nightingale sings the lock, but the wren holds the key to the garden. Another puzzle? Alistair murmured against her ear. It seems so, Elara replied, leaning back against his chest. The nightingale was the key to the loom, the secret to restoring your father's legacy. But this, a garden? It feels like something different. Not a fortune to be won, but a treasure to be found. He smiled, tightening his embrace. He looked around the studio, at the vibrant, half-finished canvases that had replaced the somber landscapes of her early days at Blackwood. He looked at the woman in his arms, his partner, his wife, his illogical, brilliant heart. The cage he had once offered her had become their shared sanctuary. The contract had become a covenant. The Iron Duke was a relic of the past, melted down and reforged in the steady, gentle fire of a love that had taught him the difference between a house and a home, between a balance sheet and a life. Whatever new secrets the past held, he knew with absolute certainty that they would solve them together.